The morning of her 21st birthday, Seraphina Ashworth woke to burning flesh. Not the gentle warmth of sunlight through her cottage window, but a searing heat that clawed from beneath her skin, demanding attention she had never been required to give. Her right shoulder blade felt as though molten metal had been pressed against it, and when she twisted before her mirror, gasping at the intensity, she saw what generations of her family had described, but none had truly prepared her for. The mark bloomed across her shoulder like spilled ink mixed with starlight, intricate as ancient script but beautiful beyond any earthly language. Spiraling patterns wound around each other in impossible geometries, pulsing with a light that seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper than her skin. But it was the direction of its pull that made her blood run cold north, toward the Shadowlands, toward the cursed realm where no human had ventured in 3 decades and returned unchanged. "It cannot be," she whispered to her reflection, watching the mark flare brighter as she spoke the words aloud. The legend spoke of soulmate marks leading to love, to partnership, to the one person who would complete the missing pieces of your soul. They did not speak of marks that pointed toward the domain of demons, toward the prince whose name mothers used to frighten disobedient children into compliance. Seraphina pressed her palm against the mark, hoping to smother its insistent pull, but the connection only intensified. Somewhere in the north, beyond the borders of everything she had known, someone bore the matching half of this impossible sign. Someone who lived in a land where the sun never fully rose, where shadows moved independently of the objects that cast them, where the very air was said to corrupt human hearts. Her cottage door rattled under urgent knocking before she could fully process the implications. "Seraphina." Her mentor's voice carried the sharp edge of panic. "Child, we felt it from the village. The magic what has happened?" Lydia Thornwick had trained Seraphina in the healing art since childhood, had taught her to read the old texts and understand the properties of herbs that grew in moonlight. The older woman's silver hair whipped around her face as she burst through the door without waiting for invitation, her keen eyes immediately finding the source of the disturbance. "Show me," Lydia commanded, and Seraphina found herself turning, lifting her sleeping gown to reveal the mark that now felt like a living thing against her skin. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to voice. Lydia's weathered hands trembled as she reached toward the mark, stopping just short of touching it. "In all my years," she whispered, "I have never seen one so vivid, so demanding." "It points north," Seraphina said, though she suspected Lydia already knew. "The Shadowlands." Lydia's voice carried 40 years of bitter memory. "Where Prince Kael rules from his fortress of bone and shadow, where the very ground drinks the blood of those foolish enough to cross his borders." Seraphina had grown up with stories of the demon prince, how he had torn through human settlements like a plague, how his armies had turned the northern reaches into a wasteland of perpetual twilight, how he had killed the previous human king's daughter when she had been sent as a peace offering, displaying her bones on the walls of his castle as a warning to any who might dare approach with thoughts of diplomacy. "There must be some mistake," Seraphina said, though even as she spoke, the mark pulsed with renewed intensity, as if responding to her denial. "The mark does not lie," Lydia replied grimly. "It connects souls across any distance, any barrier. If yours has awakened and points toward the Shadowlands, then your soulmate dwells there." The implications crashed over Seraphina like a tide of ice water. If her mark pointed toward the Shadowlands, if someone there bore its match, then either her soulmate was one of the demons who served Prince Kael, or the thought made her stomach clench it was the prince himself. "I cannot go," she said, but the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. The mark's pull was not something that could be ignored indefinitely. She had read the old texts, knew the stories of those who had tried to deny their soulmate bonds. They withered like flowers cut from their roots, growing more hollow with each passing day until nothing remained but empty shells of who they had once been. "The choice may not be yours to make," Lydia said softly. "The bond will grow stronger with each passing day. Within a week you will barely be able to focus on anything else. Within a month you will be unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to think of anything but the pull toward your match." Seraphina sank onto her bed, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what her 21st birthday had brought. She had always imagined her soulmate would be a fellow healer, perhaps, or a scholar from one of the southern cities. Someone who would understand her love of ancient texts and herb gardens. Someone who would build a quiet life of purpose and contentment. Not a demon. Not a prince who rolled over shadows and commanded armies of nightmares. "There has to be another way," she said, though she could hear the desperation in her own voice. Lydia sat beside her, taking her hands in weathered fingers. "Child, I know this is not what you wanted, but the old magic is not something that can be bargained with or reasoned away. If this mark has awakened and points toward the Shadowlands, then perhaps—" She paused, seeming to struggle with her next words. "Perhaps there is more to this than we understand." "What do you mean?" "The texts speak of soulmate bonds that transcend the normal divisions between peoples. Bonds that exist for purposes greater than simple companionship." Lydia's eyes grew distant. "There are prophecies, old ones, that speak of a connection that could bridge the gap between our worlds. But they are fragmentary, incomplete. Much knowledge was lost during the Shadow Wars." Seraphina felt the mark pulse again, and with it came an emotion that was not her own, a deep, aching loneliness that seemed to echo from somewhere far away. For just a moment, she felt as though someone else was sharing her thoughts, someone who carried grief like a physical weight. "I felt something," she whispered. "Just then. It was not my own emotion." Lydia's expression grew troubled. "The bond is already forming. The longer you delay, the stronger it will become, until you will be unable to distinguish your feelings from his." The thought terrified Seraphina. To lose herself in the emotions of a demon prince, to become entangled with someone who represented everything her people feared and despised, it seemed like a fate worse than death. But as the day wore on and the mark continued to burn against her skin, she began to understand that this was not a choice she could simply refuse. The pull northward grew stronger with each passing hour, accompanied by flashes of sensation that belonged to someone else, the taste of wine gone bitter, the weight of a crown that sat too heavy on tired shoulders, the sound of a child's laughter that seemed to cut through darkness like a blade. That last sensation confused her most of all. What demon prince would be surrounded by the laughter of children? By evening, Seraphina found herself standing at her cottage door, a travel pack slung over her shoulder and her meager savings tucked into her belt. The mark had become impossible to ignore, and beneath its insistent pull, she could feel something else, a curiosity that might have been her own, or might have belonged to the stranger who shared her bond. "You are truly going," Lydia said, though it was not a question. "I have to know," Seraphina replied. "If I am bound to someone in the Shadowlands, I have to understand what that means. I cannot live the rest of my life wondering, cannot bear the thought of withering away without even attempting to understand why this has happened." Lydia pressed a small cloth pouch into her hands. "Protective herbs," she explained. "They may do nothing against demon magic, but they will help you maintain clarity of thought. And this." She placed a silver pendant around Seraphina's neck, a simple design that seemed to shimmer with inner light. "A ward against possession. It will not prevent the soulmate bond, but it will ensure that your thoughts remain your own." The pendant settled against Seraphina's chest with a comforting weight, and she found she could breathe a little easier. The mark's pull remained, but it no longer felt quite so overwhelming. "Thank you," she said, embracing the woman who had been like a mother to her. "Send word when you can," Lydia replied. "And remember, whatever you find in the Shadowlands, you are stronger than you know. The magic chose you for a reason." The journey north took 3 days of hard travel through increasingly barren landscape. Seraphina had never ventured beyond the borders of her small country, and she found herself constantly amazed by the way the world changed around her. The green fields of her home gave way to rocky hills, then to stretches of gray stone where nothing grew but the hardiest of shrubs. As she drew closer to the Shadowlands, the very air seemed to thicken, taking on a quality she had never experienced before. It was not quite fog, not quite darkness, but something that lay between the two, a substance that made colors seem muted and distances difficult to judge. The border itself was unmistakable. One moment she was walking on ordinary ground under ordinary sky, and the next she had stepped into a realm where the sun seemed filtered through layers of gauze, where shadows moved independently of their sources, where the very ground beneath her feet hummed with an energy that made her teeth ache. The mark on her shoulder flared to life as she crossed the boundary, burning with such intensity that she cried out. But with the pain came something else, a sense of recognition, of connection suddenly snapping into sharp focus. Somewhere nearby, someone else had felt that same flare of sensation. Seraphina pressed on, following the mark's pull through landscapes that seemed designed to disorient. Trees grew in impossible configurations, their branches intertwining in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The path beneath her feet appeared solid but occasionally gave way to softer ground without warning, as if the very earth could not decide what it wanted to be. She had been walking for hours when she first glimpsed the castle. It rose from the landscape like a growth of black crystal, its spires reaching toward the perpetually gray sky with an elegance that was both beautiful and terrible. This was not the fortress of bone and shadow that the stories described, but something far more complex, a structure that seemed to have been carved from a single piece of midnight, its walls reflecting light in ways that created patterns of stunning beauty. As she drew closer, Seraphina could see that the castle was not empty. Lights flickered in windows, and she could hear the distant sound of voices, not the howls of demons, but ordinary conversation, the kind that might be overheard in any village square. The mark guided her to a side entrance, a smaller door set into the base of what appeared to be a garden tower. The door stood slightly ajar, and through it she could hear something that made her pause in confusion, the sound of a child crying, and a deep male voice speaking in gentle, soothing tones. "There now, little one," the voice said, and Seraphina felt her heart skip as she recognized the timbre of it, the way it seemed to resonate with something deep in her chest. It was only a dream. "You are safe here." She pushed the door open and stepped into a chamber that was nothing like what she had expected to find in a demon prince's castle. The walls were lined with books, hundreds of them, their spines bearing titles in languages she recognized and others she did not. A fire crackled in a hearth carved from what appeared to be polished obsidian, and before it sat a man holding a child of perhaps 4 years old. The man's hair was dark as midnight, his skin pale as moonlight, and when he looked up at her entrance, his eyes were the color of winter storms. But it was not his otherworldly beauty that made her breath catch, it was the way the mark on her shoulder sang with recognition, the way every fiber of her being seemed to recognize this person as the missing piece of her soul. "You came," he said, and his voice carried a note of wonder that seemed entirely at odds with his reputation as a heartless killer. The child in his arms, a little girl with golden hair and eyes like summer sky, looked at Seraphina with caring, curious innocence. "Papa Kael," she said. "Who is the pretty lady?" Prince Kael's eyes never left Seraphina's face as he answered, "She is someone very important, little star. Someone I have been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." Seraphina felt the world tilt around her. This was not the scene she had expected to find a demon prince comforting a human child, speaking with gentleness that seemed to come from genuine affection rather than calculated manipulation. "You are Prince Kael," she said, though it was not really a question. "I am," he confirmed. "And you are Seraphina Ashworth, healer of Millbrook, daughter of Elena who died of the wasting sickness when you were 12, trained by Lydia Thornwick, who once served in the court of King Aldrich before she chose a quieter life." The specificity of his knowledge should have frightened her, but instead she found herself curious. "How do you know so much about me?" "In the same way you know that I have not slept properly in 3 years, that I carry the weight of every death in the Shadow Wars. But I have spent the last 4 years raising a child who was sent to me as a weapon and became instead the light of my existence." His smile was sad but genuine. "The bond works both ways, Seraphina. I have been feeling echoes of your life for months now, ever since my own mark began to stir." He shifted the child in his arms, and Seraphina caught sight of his left shoulder, where a mark identical to her own showed through the open collar of his shirt. The sight of it sent a jolt of recognition through her entire being, confirming what she had already known but hadn't been able to fully accept. "Why don't you put Luna to bed?" she found herself saying, "and then we can talk." The naturalness of her suggestion surprised her. She had spent days dreading this moment, expecting to find a monster who would either try to corrupt her or destroy her. Instead, she found herself looking at a man who seemed as confused by their situation as she was, who held a child with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing so for years. "Would you like to help?" Kael asked, and there was something almost shy in the way he made the offer. Seraphina nodded, following him from the library through corridors that were elegant rather than ominous. The castle was clearly designed for comfort as much as defense, with tapestries that depicted scenes of natural beauty rather than conquest, with windows that had been positioned to make the most of what little light penetrated the perpetual twilight of the Shadowlands. Luna's room was a child's paradise, filled with toys and books and pictures painted on the walls, in bright, cheerful colors. The little girl chattered happily as Kael helped her into her nightgown, talking about the story he had been reading to her, about the garden they had visited that morning, about the new kitten that had taken up residence in the kitchen. "Will the pretty lady still be here tomorrow?" Luna asked as Kael tucked her into bed. "I hope so," he replied, glancing at Seraphina with an expression that held both hope and uncertainty. "She smells like flowers," Luna observed, "and she has kind eyes. I like her." Seraphina felt her heart clench at the child's easy acceptance. "I like you too, sweetheart," she said, surprising herself with the endearment. When Luna was finally settled and they had returned to the library, Seraphina found herself sitting across from the man who was supposedly the greatest enemy of her people, trying to reconcile everything she had been taught with the reality of what she had observed. "She is not your child," she said, though she already knew the answer. "No," Kael confirmed. "She was sent to me 4 years ago by a group of human nobles who thought they could use her as a weapon against me. A child whose parents had been killed in one of the border skirmishes, raised by fanatics who filled her head with poison and trained her to get close to me so she could drive a blade into my heart. But she calls you Papa." "She does now." His smile was soft, full of an affection that no amount of political maneuvering could fake. "It took nearly a year before she stopped trying to kill me. Another year before she began to trust that I would not hurt her. And somewhere in that time, she became the most important thing in my world." Seraphina studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "Why? Why would you care for the child of your enemies?" "Because she was 4 years old and utterly alone in the world," Kael replied simply. "Because she had been taught that her only value lay in her ability to cause death, and someone needed to show her that she was worth loving just for being herself. Because," he paused, seeming to struggle with the words, "because I know what it is to be used as a weapon, and I could not bear to see another child carry that burden." The raw honesty in his voice made Seraphina's chest tight. This was not the response she had expected from a demon prince, not the calculated manipulation she had been warned about. "The stories about you," she said carefully, "they paint you as a monster. They say you killed King Aldrich's daughter, that you displayed her bones as a warning." Kael's expression darkened, and for a moment she glimpsed something that might have been the prince from the stories, a flash of power that made the air around him shimmer with dangerous energy. "Princess Alara was not killed by me," he said, his voice carrying an edge that had not been there before. "She was killed by the same people who sent Luna to me, human nobles, who thought they could use her death to justify a war that would rid them of the inconvenience of my existence." "What do you mean?" "Alara came to me seeking alliance, not as a sacrifice but as a diplomat. She had discovered that certain factions within her father's court were planning to use her as a pretext for war. They would claim I had killed her regardless of what actually happened to her." His hands clenched into fists. "I offered her sanctuary, protection, a chance to disappear and build a new life far from the politics that had made her a pawn. She chose instead to return to her father's court, to try to expose the conspiracy from within. And they killed her for it. They killed her and blamed me for it, displaying her bones on the walls of a fortress they had built to look like mine, making sure that everyone who mattered saw the evidence of my brutality." The bitterness in his voice was deep enough to drown in. "I have been fighting a war against people who are willing to murder their own children to maintain their power, and the rest of the world believes I am the monster." Seraphina felt the pieces of a much larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Is that why you stopped the attacks? Why the border has been quiet for the past 4 years? I stopped the attacks because I finally understood that I was fighting the wrong war, Kael said. Every time I struck back at those who had orchestrated Ilara's death, innocent people suffered. Every time I defended my borders, I gave them more ammunition for their propaganda. So I withdrew, focused on building something better here, rather than trying to destroy what lay beyond my borders. And Luna? Luna was their next attempt to draw me back into the conflict. They thought that if they could make me care for a human child, they could use her as leverage against me. They did not expect me to actually love her, or for her to love me in return. His expression softened as he spoke of the child. They certainly did not expect her to refuse to cooperate with their plans when they finally revealed what they expected her to do. The mark on Seraphina's shoulder pulsed warmly, and she realized that her understanding of Kael was changing the fundamental nature of their bond. She was no longer connected to a demon prince who represented everything she feared, but to a man who had been painted as a monster by people who were willing to commit unspeakable acts to maintain their power. The soulmate bond, she said slowly. It appeared at the same time for both of us? 3 days ago, Kael confirmed. On the anniversary of the day I decided to stop fighting their war and start building something better. That cannot be a coincidence. No, he agreed. I do not think it is. There are old prophecies, fragments of texts that speak of a bond that will bridge the gap between our peoples. But they are incomplete, scattered across dozens of sources, and I have not been able to piece together their full meaning. Seraphina felt a thrill of excitement despite everything else that was happening. I am a scholar, she said. I have spent years studying the old texts, learning to read the languages that have been largely forgotten. If you have access to these prophecies, perhaps together we can understand what they mean. Together, Kael repeated, and there was something in the way he said the word that made her heart skip. I had not dared to hope that you would be willing to consider that possibility. I came here, expecting to find a monster, Seraphina admitted. I find instead a man who has Bane fighting a war against people who are willing to murder children to achieve their goals. A man who has chosen to raise a child who is sent to kill him. A man who has been slandered and vilified by the very people he was trying to protect. I am not entirely innocent, Kael said quietly. I have killed Seraphina. I have done things that will haunt me for the rest of my existence. The power I wield is not something that can be used without consequence. I know, she replied. I can feel it through the weight of every decision you have made, every life you have taken, every choice that has led you to this moment. But I can also feel the grief you carry, the way you have questioned every action, the way you have tried to find a path that would lead to something better than endless conflict. She paused, studying his face in the flickering firelight. What I do not understand is how you have maintained such humanity while wielding the kind of power that could easily corrupt anyone. Luna, he said simply. Having to explain my actions to a child who looks at me with absolute trust, it changes how you see yourself, how you weigh your choices. She has been my anchor, my reminder that there is still goodness in the world worth, quote, protecting. As if summoned by their conversation, the little girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes with one small fist. Papa Kael, she said, I cannot sleep. The storm is too loud. Only then did Seraphina notice the sound of rain against the windows, the distant rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. But there was something else in the sound. Something that made her mark burn with sudden intensity. That is not a natural storm, Kael said, rising to his feet with fluid grace. Someone is trying to break through the wards. Who would Seraphina began, but he was already moving, scooping Luna into his arms and striding toward the window. The same people who killed Ilara, he said grimly. The same people who sent Luna to me. They must have realized that the soulmate bond has activated, that there is now a connection between the Shadowlands and the human kingdoms that they cannot control. What do they want? To eliminate the threat I represent, Kael replied. And now, to eliminate you as well. A soulmate bond between a human and a demon prince is exactly the kind of thing that could upset the careful balance of power they have spent decades maintaining. The sound of the storm was growing closer, and Seraphina could see shapes moving within the clouds, not natural weather patterns, but something that had been summoned and directed by human will. "We need to get to the warded chambers," Kael said, already moving toward the door. "The protections there will hold against magical attack, at least temporarily." But as they reached the corridor, they were met by a figure that made Seraphina's blood run cold. A woman stood at the far end of the hallway, her expensive robes marking her as nobility, her face twisted with a hatred that seemed to burn like acid. "Prince Kael," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly despite the distance between them. "And the little healer who has so foolishly walked into our trap." "Lady Morgana," Kael replied, and Seraphina could feel the way his entire being focused on the threat before them. "I thought you might be behind this. Did you think we would simply allow you to forge a bond with one of our people?" Morgana's laughter was sharp enough to cut glass. "Did you think we would stand by and watch as you gained a foothold in our world through some ridiculous fairy tale about soulmates?" "The bond is real," Seraphina said, stepping forward despite the fear that crawled up her spine. "I can feel it, he can feel it. You cannot simply pretend it does not exist." "Oh, but we can," Morgana replied. "A soulmate bond can be severed, little healer. The process is unpleasant for both parties, but it can be done. And once it is broken, there will be nothing to prevent us from eliminating the threat that Prince Kael represents." "You would murder your own people to maintain your power," Kael said, his voice carrying a note of disgust that made the air around him shimmer with barely contained energy. "We would do what is necessary to protect our people from the corruption you represent," Morgana corrected. "Your very existence is a threat to the natural order. Demons and humans are not meant to coexist, much less to love each other." The mark on Seraphina's shoulder burned with sudden intensity, and she gasped as she felt an echo of Kael's power flowing through their connection. It was not the cold, corrupting energy she had expected, but something that felt like starlight made manifest, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. "You are wrong," she said, her voice carrying more strength than she had known she possessed. "The bond between us is not corruption, it is completion. It is the missing piece that could heal the wounds between our peoples." "Pretty words," Morgana sneered. "But words will not save you from what is coming." The storm outside intensified, and Seraphina could see more figures moving through the corridors of the castle. Armed soldiers wearing the colors of the human kingdoms, their weapons glowing with enchantments designed to cut through demon flesh. "Take Luna and go," Kael said quietly, not taking his eyes off Morgana. "There is a passage behind the tapestry in the library. It leads to the garden tower, and from there you can—" "I am not leaving you," Seraphina interrupted, and the certainty in her voice surprised even her. "Seraphina, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I understand that you have been fighting this war alone for too long, that you have been carrying the weight of impossible choices without anyone to share the burden. I understand that Luna needs both of us, that she has found a father in you, and could find a mother in me if we are brave enough to claim the future the bond offers us." Kael's eyes met hers, and she saw wonder there, and hope, and something that might have been love already beginning to bloom. "The prophecies," he said suddenly. "Seraphina, I think I understand now. The bond between Isit is not just about love. It is about power, about the ability to change the fundamental nature of magic itself." "What do you mean?" "Human magic and demon magic are not opposites," he said rapidly, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. "They are complementary forces, two halves of a whole that has been artificially divided. The soulmate bond between us, it could reunite those forces, create something stronger than either could achieve alone." Seraphina felt the truth of his words resonating through their connection. The mark on her shoulder was not just burning, Nuet was singing, harmonizing with some deeper rhythm that seemed to pulse through the very foundations of the castle. "Then we do it," she said. "We stop running from what we are and start embracing what we could become. The risk is worth it," she finished. "For Luna. For your people. For mine. For the possibility of a world where children are not raised to be weapons, where love is not seen as a threat to be eliminated. Morgana's laughter cut through their conversation like a blade. How touching, she said. But ultimately irrelevant. You cannot explore your little theories while you are both dead. The soldiers had reached their corridor now, their weapons raised and ready. But as they advanced, Seraphina felt the bond between her and Kael suddenly flare to life with an intensity that made her previous experiences with it seem like barely perceptible whispers. Power flowed between them, not the cold energy of demon magic or the gentle warmth of human healing, but something entirely new, a force that seemed to encompass both and transcend the limitations of either. She could feel Kael's strength becoming her own, could sense her own knowledge and skill flowing into him, creating a connection that was deeper than shared thought or emotion. "Luna," she said, her voice carrying a note of command that surprised even her, "go to your room and stay there. Put up the wards I taught you." The little girl nodded, already moving with the quick obedience of a child who had learned to recognize danger. But as she passed Seraphina, she whispered, "Take care of Papa Kael. He needs you." The words hit Seraphina like a physical blow, not because of what they revealed about Luna's understanding of the situation, but because of what they revealed about her own feelings. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from dreading this encounter to feeling protective of the man who stood beside her, from seeing him as a threat to seeing him as someone who needed her as much as she needed him. "Together," Kael said, and she could hear the same realization in his voice. "Together," she agreed. The soldiers reached the men, their weapons moving with practiced precision. But as they struck, they found themselves facing not a demon prince alone, but a force that none of them had trained to combat. Seraphina's healing magic flowed through Kael's defensive spells, creating barriers that repaired themselves as quickly as they were damaged. His raw power channeled through her knowledge of anatomy and physiology, creating attacks that targeted pressure points and nerve clusters with surgical precision. The first wave of soldiers fell without any of them suffering fatal injury. They were simply rendered unconscious, their weapons scattered across the floor. But Seraphina could see more figures approaching, and she knew that they would not be able to maintain this level of coordination indefinitely. "We need to get to the prophecies," she said, ducking as a magical blast scorched the air where her head had been. "If we can understand the full scope of what the bond makes possible, we might be able to end this without more bloodshed." "The vault," Kael replied, catching her hand and pulling her toward a tapestry that concealed a hidden passage. "The oldest texts are kept there, protected by wards that have been in place for centuries." They ran through passages that seemed to twist and turn in ways that defied the castle's external architecture, Seraphina's hand clasped firmly in Kael's as they navigated by the light of his magic. Behind them, she could hear the sounds of pursuit boots on stone, shouted orders, the crash of doors being forced open. The vault was a circular chamber carved from living rock, its walls lined with alcoves that held books and scrolls older than any human kingdom. At the center of the room stood a pedestal that held a single volume bound in scales that seemed to shift color in the light. "The Codex of Binding," Kael said, releasing her hand and moving toward the pedestal. "It contains the most complete record of the prophecies, but it is written in the old tongue, the language that was spoken before humans and demons were separated." "I can read it," Seraphina said, joining him at the prat. Pedestal. "Lydia taught me the old scripts, said they were necessary for understanding the deepest mysteries of healing magic." She opened the book, and the words on the page seemed to glow with inner light as her eyes traced them. The language was complex, layered with meanings that shifted depending on context, but she found herself able to parse the intricate verses with growing excitement. "Listen to this," she said, translating as she read. "When shadow and light find their balance, when the child of earth claims the prince of air, when love bridges the gap that hatred has carved, then shall the sundered magics be made whole, and the world shall know peace not through conquest but through unity." "The child of earth," Kael repeated. "That must refer to you humans are tied to the earth element, to growing things and healing magic. And the prince of air," Seraphina continued, "would be you. Demon magic is tied to the upper elements, to transformation and power that transcends physical limitations. But what does it mean about the sundered magics being made whole? Seraphina turned the page, searching for more context. Here, she said, pointing to a passage that seemed to pulse with particular intensity. It says that the original magic was not divided into human and demon types, but was a single force that contained both aspects. The division came later, created by those who sought to control power by limiting access to it. You mean the separation between our peoples was not natural? According to this, it was artificially imposed. The text says that, she paused, reading more carefully. It says that the separation was created by a council of both humans and demons who feared that unified magic would be too powerful for any one group to control. They convinced both sides that the other was Tiber, inherently dangerous, that mixing the magical traditions would lead to corruption and chaos. Like Morgana, Kael said grimly. Like the nobles who killed Ilara and sent Luna to me. They maintain their power by keeping our peoples divided, by ensuring that neither side can access the full spectrum of magical knowledge. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the passages leading to the vault, and Seraphina knew they had little time left. She turned pages rapidly, searching for more specific information about how the unified magic could be restored. Here, she said, her voice tight with urgency. It describes a ritual of binding, a way to permanently merge the severed magical traditions, but it requires. She paused, reading the requirements with growing understanding. It requires a willing sacrifice from both sides, a demonstration of trust so complete that it breaks down the barriers between the magics. What kind of sacrifice? Not death, Seraphina said quickly, seeing the fear that flashed across his face. But a sharing of essence, a voluntary merging of power that would make the bond between us permanent and irreversible. We would become something new, something that transcends the limitations of both human and demon magic. The risks are worth it, she said firmly. Look at what we have already accomplished together. The soldiers we faced, we defeated them without killing them, found the way to neutralize the threat without adding to the cycle of violence. Imagine what we could achieve if we stopped holding back. Kael's eyes searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or coercion. You would give up your humanity for this? You would bind yourself to me permanently, knowing that there would be no way to undo the choice? I would bind myself to you, Seraphina corrected, knowing that together we could build something better than either of us could achieve alone, knowing that Luna would grow up in a world where she is not caught between two sides of an artificial conflict, where she can be loved for who she is rather than used as a weapon. The footsteps were getting closer, and she could hear Morgana's voice directing the search. They had perhaps minutes before the vault was discovered and breached. The ritual, she said, turning back to the book. It requires a physical anchor, something that can channel the unified magic and serve as a focal point for the transformation. The castle, Kael said suddenly. The entire structure is built on a convergence of ley lines, designed to channel and focus magical energy. If we perform the ritual in the central chamber, the power released could be anchored in the very foundations of the crack. Shadowlands. That would change everything, Seraphina breathed. Not just for us, but for everyone who lives here. The entire realm would become a bridge between human and demon magic. A sanctuary, Kael agreed. A place where both peoples could come to study, to learn, to understand that the differences between us are not insurmountable barriers but complementary strengths. The vault door exploded inward, and Morgana strode through the opening with a dozen armed soldiers at her back. Her face was twisted with rage, and the air around her crackled with barely contained magical energy. Enough, she snarled. You will not be allowed to complete whatever foolish ritual you have discovered. The natural order will be maintained, even if it requires your deaths. The natural order, Seraphina said, closing the book and holding it against her chest, is not what you have convinced everyone it is. The separation between our peoples is artificial, created by those who sought to maintain power by keeping us apart. Lies, Morgana spat. Demon magic is corruption, an abomination that taints everything it touches. The fact that you have been influenced by it so quickly proves how dangerous it is. I have not been corrupted, Seraphina replied calmly. I have been completed. The magic flowing through me now is not foreign or invasive, it is the missing half of what I was always meant to be. Then you are no longer human, Morgana said, raising her hand to cast a spell that would have reduced Seraphina to ash. And you are no longer under our protection. The spell never landed. As Morgana released it, Seraphina felt the bond between her and Kael flare to life with unprecedented intensity. The magic that struck her was not absorbed or deflected, it was transformed. Changed from destructive force into something that fed the connection between them. You cannot destroy what we have become, Kael said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. The bond between us is not vulnerable to the same attacks that would affect us individually. Then we will separate you, Morgana snarled, turning to her soldiers. Kill the demon prince. The bond will not survive the death of one of its anchors. The soldiers moved forward, but as they did, Seraphina felt something shift within the very fabric of the castle around them. The ley lines that Kael had mentioned were responding to the power flowing between them, awakening from centuries of dormancy. The ritual, she said urgently, it is starting whether we guide it or not. The convergence of power is too great to be contained. Then we complete it properly, Kael replied, taking her hand and pulling her toward the center of the chamber. We make the choice consciously, with full knowledge of what we are creating. You will not. Morgana began, but her words were cut off as the entire castle shuddered, power flowing through its foundations like water through a dam that had suddenly been opened. Seraphina felt the change beginning in her bones, a transformation that was not painful but overwhelming in its completeness. The mark on her shoulder was no longer burning, it was singing, harmonizing with the matching mark on Kael's skin to create a resonance that seemed to reach into the very core of her being. I love you, she said, the words coming from someplace deeper than conscious thought. I choose you, I choose this, I choose the future we can build together. And I choose you, Kael replied, his voice carrying the same depth of certainty. I choose to trust you with everything I am, everything I have been, everything I could become. The ritual completed itself around them, not requiring spoken words or complex gestures, but feeding on the simple truth of their commitment to each other. The power that flowed between them expanded outward, touching every stone of the castle, every person within its walls, every inch of the Shadowlands themselves. Morgana's scream of rage was cut short as the transformation reached her, not harming her but changing her in ways that she could not have anticipated. The artificial barriers that had allowed her to see demons as irredeemably evil crumbled, replaced by an understanding of the complex factors that had shaped the conflict between their peoples. The soldiers lowered their weapons, no longer able to maintain the hatred that had driven them to this place. They could see Kael now not as a monster, but as a man who had been fighting the same battle they had been, just from the other side. What have you done? Morgana whispered, her voice stripped of its earlier venom. What should have been done centuries ago? Seraphina replied, feeling the power settling into new patterns within her transformed body. We have ended the artificial division between our peoples. The consequences will be dealt with as they arise, Kael said firmly. But they will be dealt with by both sides working together, not by one side trying to dominate the other. The changes were not limited to the castle or its immediate surroundings. Seraphina could feel the unified magic spreading outward like ripples in a pond, touching human villages and demon strongholds alike. Wherever it reached, the barriers that had kept the peoples apart began to dissolve, replaced by understanding and the possibility of cooperation. Luna, she said suddenly, realizing that the little girl had been alone during the transformation. She is safe, Kael assured her. The magic recognized her as ours to protect. She will be changed too, but gently, in ways that will help her grow into the bridge between worlds that she was always meant to be. They found Luna in her room, sitting by the window and watching the sun break through the perpetual clouds of the Shadowlands for the first time in decades. The little girl turned as they entered, and Seraphina saw that her eyes now held flecks of silver that had not been there before, marks of the magic that had touched her. The scary lady is not scary anymore, Luna observed with the straightforward honesty of childhood. She is sad, but not angry. And the sky is pretty now. Yes, Seraphina agreed, sitting beside her on the window seat. "The sky is pretty, and it is going to stay that way. Are you going to be my mama now?" Luna asked, looking between her and Kael with an expression of hopeful curiosity. "If you would like me to be," Seraphina replied, feeling her heart expand with a love that encompassed not just Kael, but the child who had become so important to both of them. "I would like that very much," Luna said, climbing into her lap with the easy trust of a child who had never doubted that she was loved. Over the following weeks, the transformation continued to spread. Human scholars arrived at the castle, drawn by reports of the unified magic and eager to study the possibilities it represented. Demon mages who had been isolated for generations emerged from hiding, curious about the changes they could sense in the fabric of reality itself. Not everyone was happy about the new reality. There were those on both sides who had benefited from the conflict, who had built their identities around the hatred between the peoples, but they found themselves increasingly isolated as the majority of both populations began to discover the advantages of cooperation over conflict. "The hardest part," Seraphina told Kael one evening as they watched Luna play in the garden with children from both human and demon families, "is not the magic or the politics. It is learning to see ourselves as we really are rather than as we were taught to be." "You mean learning to see ourselves as worthy of love rather than as weapons to be used against each other?" Kael agreed. "Luna is helping with that. She sees no difference between human and demon magic, treats both as equally natural and useful. She is going to be extraordinary," Seraphina said, watching the little girl direct a group of older children in the construction of what appeared to be a fairy house made from living vines and crystallized light. "She already is," Kael replied. "But then, so are you. So are we." The castle had become a center of learning and diplomacy, a place where representatives from both sides could meet on neutral ground and work toward solutions that benefited everyone. The library, where Seraphina had first seen Kael comforting Luna, had been expanded into a research center where human and demon scholars worked side by side, translating ancient texts and developing new applications for the unified magic. "There is a delegation arriving tomorrow," Kael mentioned, reviewing a letter that had arrived that morning from the southern kingdoms. "They want to establish formal diplomatic relations." "That is good," Seraphina said, though she could hear the uncertainty in her own voice. But change is never easy, especially for those who have spent their lives believing in the necessity of conflict. There will be resistance, attempts to return to the old ways. "There will," Kael agreed. "But there will also be people like us, people who choose to build rather than destroy, who see the possibility of something better and are willing to work toward it. People like Luna," Seraphina added, watching the little girl demonstrate to a group of fascinated adults how to weave human healing magic with demon transformation spells to create plants that can grow in conditions that would normally be hostile to life. "Especially like Luna," Kael said. "She is the future, Seraphina. She is what our world could become if we have the courage to let go of the past." The future they were building was not without its challenges. There were still those who saw the unified magic as a threat, who believed that the separation between human and demon was ordained by divine will rather than created by political necessity. There were border disputes to resolve, trade agreements to negotiate, and the delicate work of building trust between peoples who had been enemies for generations. But there was also hope. More hope than either Seraphina or Kael had dared to imagine when they first met in the library of the castle. The bond between them had become a model for cooperation, a demonstration that the differences between their peoples were not insurmountable barriers but complementary strengths. "Do you ever regret it?" Seraphina asked one night as they stood together on the castle's highest tower, looking out over the Shadowlands that were no longer perpetually shrouded in twilight. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if the bond had never formed?" "Never," Kael replied without hesitation. "The person I was before you, he was incomplete, fighting a war he could never win, carrying burdens he was never meant to bear alone. With you, I am not just stronger, I am whole. Even though it means you can never go back to being only demon, Even though it means I can never go back to being only demon, he confirmed. The magic we share is not a limitation, it is freedom. Freedom from the artificial boundaries that kept us apart. Freedom to be everything we were meant to be. The soulmate mark that had brought them together had faded over time. No longer needed to maintain a connection that had become as natural as breathing. But sometimes, in moments of particular intimacy or shared magic, Seraphina could see the ghost of it on Kael's skin. A reminder of the miracle that had brought them together. "I love you," she said, the words carrying the same weight they had on that first night in the vault, when they had chosen to trust each other with their very souls. "And I love you," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "I love you, and I love the life we are building together, and I love the future that stretches out before us." Below them, the castle hummed with the voices of people from both sides of the old conflict, working together to build something better than either could have achieved alone. In the garden, Luna's laughter rang out as she played with friends who would never know the hatred that had once divided their peoples. The war between humans and demons was over, not because one side had conquered the other, but because the artificial barriers that had created the conflict had been dissolved. In their place was something new, a world where love could bridge any gap, where understanding could overcome any prejudice, where the future was limited only by the courage of those who dared to dream of something better. And at the center of it all was the bond between a human healer and a demon prince, a connection that had begun with burning flesh, impossible hope, and had grown into something that changed the world. Seraphina had followed her soulmate mark into what she had believed was enemy territory, expecting to find a monster. Instead, she had found her other half, the missing piece of her soul that made her complete. She had found love, and purpose, and a future that was brighter than any she had dared to imagine. The demon prince's arms had indeed been a trap, but not the kind of trap she had feared. They had been a trap of love, of belonging, of finding her place in a world that was larger and more complex than she had ever known. And she had walked into that trap willingly, gladly, knowing that it would transform her into something greater than she had ever been alone. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the sundered magics made whole, and the world had indeed found peace through unity rather than conquest. And it had all begun with a young woman who had been brave enough to follow her heart into the unknown, and a prince who had been wise enough to choose love over power. Their story was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more prejudices to overcome, more work to be done in building the world they had envisioned. But they would face it together, as they had faced everything else, with love, with courage, and with the unshakable knowledge that they were stronger together than either could ever be alone. The soulmate mark had led Seraphina to the enemy's castle and into the demon prince's arms, but it had also led her home, to the place where she belonged, to the person who completed her, to the future that awaited them both. And in the end, that was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any challenge that might come their way. Love was worth the cost of a kingdom, because love was what made kingdoms worth saving in the first place. The sun set over the Shadowlands, no longer filtered through perpetual clouds but shining clear and bright, illuminating a world that had been transformed by the power of a bond that transcended every barrier that had ever been raised between them. And in that light, Seraphina and Kael looked toward the future with hope, with joy, and with the unshakable certainty that they had found in each other everything they had ever needed to build a world worthy of the love they shared. The demon prince's arms had been her destination all along, even when she had not known it. And now, wrapped in those arms, watching the sun paint the sky in colors that seemed to celebrate their union, Seraphina knew that she had found her home, her purpose, and her heart's true desire in the most unlikely of places. Their love had bridged the gap between worlds, healed the wounds of generations, and created a future where anything was possible. And that was just the beginning of their story, the first chapter of a love that would echo through the ages, inspiring others to look beyond the barriers that seemed to separate them and find the connections that made them whole. The soulmate mark had brought them together, but it was their choice to trust, to love, and to build something beautiful together that had transformed the world. And in that transformation, they had found not just each other, but themselves complete, whole, and ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were home. Years flowed past like pages turning in an endless book of possibility. The castle that had once stood as a symbol of isolation became a beacon of learning, its towers reaching toward skies that now changed with natural weather patterns instead of magical oppression. Students arrived from every corner of the known world, young humans eager to understand the mysteries of Bao. Transformation magic. Demon scholars fascinated by the intricacies of healing arts, and those rare individuals who, like Luna, seemed born to bridge both traditions effortlessly. Seraphina found herself wearing many roles she had never anticipated. By day, she served as the head of the newly established Academy of Unified Arts, overseeing curricula that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. By evening, she worked alongside Kael in the delicate negotiations required to maintain peace between kingdoms still adjusting to the new reality. And in the quiet moments between these responsibilities, she was simply a mother to Luna, who had grown from a precocious child into a remarkable young woman whose very existence proved that the future held infinite potential. The envoys from the Eastern Principalities have arrived, Luna announced one morning, sweeping into the breakfast chamber with the confident grace of someone who had been raised in a castle but never learned to see herself as superior to others. At 16, she possessed her foster mother's gift for healing and her foster father's instinctive understanding of power dynamics, combined with an insight into human nature that seemed uniquely her own. Are they the ones who sent that rather pompous letter about the unnatural mixing of magical traditions? Kael asked, looking up from a stack of diplomatic correspondence that seemed to regenerate faster than he could process it. The very same. Luna confirmed with a grin that reminded Seraphina of the mischievous child she had once been, though I suspect their tune will change once they see what we have accomplished here. Professor Matthias has prepared a demonstration of agricultural enhancement that should prove quite persuasive. Professor Matthias had been one of the first human scholars to arrive at the castle, a former court mage whose initial skepticism about demon magic had transformed into enthusiastic collaboration once he witnessed its potential for solving problems that had plagued farmers for generations. His work in combining human earth magic with demon transformation abilities had resulted in crops that could grow in previously barren soil, feeding populations that had struggled with famine for decades. And how are our other projects progressing? Seraphina asked, settling into her chair with the fluid grace that had become second nature since her transformation. The unified magic had changed her in subtle ways. Her reflexes were faster, her senses sharper, her understanding of the world around her deeper and more nuanced. The healing centers in the border towns are reporting remarkable success rates, Luna replied, consulting a leather-bound journal that she carried everywhere. The combination of human diagnostic techniques with demon regenerative magic has reduced mortality rates by nearly 70% in cases that would previously have been considered hopeless. What about resistance? Kael inquired, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would not be entirely positive. There are still pockets of opposition, Luna admitted. Mostly among the older generation, those who lost family members during the conflicts. It is difficult for them to accept that the people they saw as enemies might hold the key to preventing future tragedies. Seraphina felt a familiar pang of sympathy for those who struggled to adapt to the new reality. Change was never easy, especially when it required abandoning beliefs that had provided structure and meaning for an entire lifetime. She had been fortunate her encounter with Kael had shattered her preconceptions so thoroughly that she had been forced to rebuild her understanding of the world from the ground up. Others had not had the benefit of such a dramatic catalyst. We must be patient, she said, reaching across the table to take Kael's hand. The simple contact sent a warm pulse of shared energy between them, a reminder of the bond that had made everything else possible. Trust is earned slowly, especially when it has been broken by generations of conflict. Speaking of trust, Luna said, her expression growing more serious. There is something else we need to discuss. I have been corresponding with other young people whose soulmate marks have awakened recently, and there appears to be a pattern developing. Kael leaned forward, his attention completely focused on his adopted daughter. What kind of pattern? Cross-species bonds, Luna replied. In the past year alone, I have documented 17 cases of soulmate marks connecting humans and demons. The youngest was a girl of 14 whose mark pointed toward the northern wastes. The oldest a demon scholar of 43 whose bond led him to a human librarian in the coastal cities. Seraphina felt her pulse quicken. When she and Kael had first bonded, they had assumed their connection was unique, a one-time magical event designed to fulfill an ancient prophecy. The possibility that their union had somehow catalyzed similar bonds between others carried implications that were both exciting and terrifying. 17 cases, Kael repeated slowly. That is not a coincidence. No, Luna agreed. It is not, and from what I can determine through my correspondence, each of these bonds has resulted in similar magical unification to what you experienced. The individuals involved have access to both human and demon magical traditions, and their presence seems to accelerate acceptance of cooperation in their local communities. It is spreading, Seraphina breathed. The change reinitiated it is not stopping with us. Which brings us to the real question, Luna continued. What do we do with this information? Do we actively seek out these new bonded pairs and offer them training and support? Do we establish a network of unified mages who can work together to accelerate the healing between our peoples? Or do we let the process develop naturally and risk these individuals facing the kind of opposition we encountered? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Seraphina's shoulders. When she had followed her soulmate Mark to the Shadowlands, she had been thinking only of her own fate. She had not anticipated better choices would affect the destinies of countless others, that the bond she and Kael shared would become a catalyst for transformation on a scale that spanned continents. We helped them, Kael said firmly. We establish the network, provide training and support, and ensure that no one has to face the challenges of bonding alone. What we experienced was difficult enough with the resources of an entire castle at our disposal. Others may not be so fortunate. I agree, Seraphina said. But we must be careful about how we approach this. If we are too aggressive in seeking out bonded pairs, we risk being seen as trying to force change rather than simply supporting those who choose it naturally. I have some ideas about that, Luna said, her eyes lighting up with the enthusiasm that always accompanied her problem-solving moods. What if we established a series of academies rather than trying to centralize everything here? Smaller institutions scattered across both human and demon territories, places where bonded pairs could receive training while remaining close to their own communities. That would require significant resources, Kael pointed out, and cooperation from local governments that may not be entirely comfortable with our goals. But it would also demonstrate our commitment to integration rather than conquest, Seraphina added. If we can show that unified magic serves local communities rather than replacing them, we are more likely to gain widespread acceptance. There is another consideration, Luna said quietly. According to my research, not all of the recent bonding attempts have been successful. 3 of the pairs I have been tracking encountered such strong resistance from their families and communities that they were forced to abandon their bonds before the unification process could complete. The implications of that statement hit Seraphina like a physical blow. She remembered the intensity of the bonding process, the way it had felt like her very soul was being rewritten. To interrupt that process voluntarily would require a level of anguish she could barely imagine. What happened to them? She asked, though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer. The human members of the bonds returned to their original communities, but they were changed, incomplete. They function normally in most respects, but there is an emptiness in them that their friends and family describe as asha, haunting. Luna's voice carried a weight of sorrow that spoke to her deep empathy for those who suffered. The demon members simply disappeared. No one knows what became of them. We cannot let that happen to others, Kael said, his voice carrying the note of absolute determination that Seraphina had learned to associate with his most unshakable decisions. Whatever resources we need to commit, whatever risks we need to take, we cannot allow fear and prejudice to destroy bonds that could heal our world. Then we begin immediately, Seraphina decided. Luna, I want you to reach out to every bonded pair you have been tracking. Offer them sanctuary here if they need it, training and support if they can remain in their own communities. Make it clear that they are not alone. What about the political implications? Luna asked. Some of the governments involved are likely to see our interference as an act of aggression. Then we make sure our actions speak louder than any propaganda they might spread, Kael replied. Every successful bonding, every community that benefits from unified magic, every problem solved through cooperation rather than conflict, these become our arguments for the value of what we are trying to accomplish. Over the following months, the castle became a nexus of activity unlike anything it had ever experienced. Bonded pairs arrived from across the known world, some seeking training, others fleeing persecution, all of them carrying pieces of a puzzle that was larger than any of them had imagined. Marcus and Lirelei were among the first to arrive, a human blacksmith and a demon artificer whose bond had allowed them to create weapons and tools that surpassed anything either tradition could produce independently. Their work had so impressed the local authorities that they had been commissioned to equip an entire army, a development that had both political and military implications. The weapons we create are not just more effective, Marcus explained during one of the evening discussions that had become a regular feature of castle life. They are specifically designed to incapacitate rather than kill. We can end conflicts without adding to the cycle of revenge that has fueled so much of the historical animosity between our peoples. That is remarkable, Seraphina said, examining one of their collaborative creations, a sword that hung with energy but felt somehow gentle to the touch. How do you manage to embed such complex enchantments in metal? It requires a level of precision that neither human nor demon magic could achieve alone. Lirelei replied. Her voice carried the musical quality common to her people, but it was tempered by the practical sensibility she had gained through her bond with Marcus. Human magic provides the foundation, the understanding of material properties and structural integrity. Demon magic provides the transformation, the ability to alter the fundamental nature of the metal itself. And the bonding process allows you to coordinate these approaches seamlessly, Kael observed. You are not just combining two types of magic, you are creating something entirely new. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. But the real breakthrough came when we realized that the weapons themselves become teaching tools. Every person who uses one of our creations gains a small measure of understanding about unified magic, even if they are not bonded themselves. The implications of this revelation were staggering. If bonded pairs could create objects that gradually familiarized others with the concept of magical unification, the process of healing between the peoples could accelerate exponentially. We need to document this, Seraphina said immediately. If we can understand the principles behind what you are doing, we might be able to teach other bonded pairs to achieve similar results in their own specializations. I have been working on that, Luna interjected, producing yet another of her ubiquitous journals. I have been tracking the various innovations that have emerged from bonded pairs, looking for common patterns and underlying principles. What have you discovered? Kael asked. 3 primary factors seem to determine the success and scope of unified magic applications. Luna replied, consulting her notes. First, the depth of the emotional bond between the partners. Couples who have achieved complete trust and understanding produce more powerful and stable effects. Second, the complementary nature of their original specializations. The more different their backgrounds, the more potential for innovation. And third, their commitment to serving others rather than pursuing personal power. That last point is particularly interesting, Seraphina mused. It suggests that unified magic is not just about combining human and demon traditions, but about transcending the selfish motivations that often drive individual magical practice. It makes sense, Marcus said. The bonding process requires such complete vulnerability and trust that it naturally eliminates the barriers that allow for exploitation of others. You cannot hide your true motivations from someone with whom you share a soul. As winter deepened around the castle, the community of bonded pairs continued to grow. There was Eldara and Thane, whose combination of human agricultural knowledge and demon weather magic had ended a drought that had threatened 3 kingdoms. There was Jin and Saskia, whose unified healing abilities had developed techniques for treating magical ailments that had previously been considered incurable. And there was young Petra and her demon partner Zorian, barely 18 years old, whose bond had manifested as an unprecedented ability to communicate with and heal the magical creatures that had been driven to violence by the environmental disruption of the wars. Each pair brought new insights, new possibilities, new hope for a future that seemed to expand with every passing day. But they also brought new challenges, new complications that required careful navigation. The Conclave with Eastern Mages has declared unified magic to be an abomination, Kael announced during one of their evening strategy sessions. They have issued a decree stating that any human who bonds with a demon should be considered corrupted and stripped of citizenship. That is hardly surprising, Seraphina replied, though she could feel the anger building in her chest. The Conclave has always been more concerned with maintaining their monopoly on magical education than with actually serving their people. The problem is that their declaration is gaining support among some of the human kingdoms, Luna added. Fear is a powerful motivator, especially when people do not understand what they are opposing. Then we make sure they understand, declared Petra, the youngest member of their growing community. Her bond with Zorian had been particularly difficult, involving persecution from both her human family and his demon clan. But it had also resulted in abilities that bordered on miraculous. We show them what unified magic can accomplish, make it impossible for them to ignore the benefits. How do you suggest we do that? Kael asked, genuinely curious about the young woman's perspective. The plague, Petra said simply. The one that has been spreading through the coastal cities. The one that conventional magic cannot cure. Jin and Saskia believe their unified healing techniques might be effective against it. But they will need support from other bonded pairs to treat enough people to make a difference. That would require most of our community to leave the safety of the castle, Seraphina pointed out. If the mission fails, or if local authorities decide to interfere, we could lose everything we have built here. But if we succeed, Zorian added, his voice carrying the deep harmonics that marked him as one of the older demon bloodlines, we demonstrate beyond any doubt that unified magic serves life rather than threatening it. We force even our strongest opponents to acknowledge the value of what we represent. The decision was not made lightly. For 3 days, the bonded pairs debated the risks and benefits of such a public demonstration of their abilities. Some argued for a more cautious approach, preferring to work quietly within established communities until acceptance grew naturally. Others supported Petra's bold proposal, believing that dramatic action was necessary to counteract the propaganda being spread by their opponents. In the end, it was Luna who provided the deciding argument. We cannot hide forever, she said during the final discussion session. Sooner or later, we will have to prove that unified magic deserves a place in the world. If we wait for perfect conditions, we may find that those conditions never arise. And if we act now, added Eldara, we do so from a position of strength, with a large community of bonded pairs to support each other. If we wait, our opponents may find ways to isolate and eliminate us one by one. The expedition that departed the castle 2 weeks later was unlike anything the world had seen in recorded history. 15 bonded pairs, each representing a different combination of human and demon magical traditions, traveling together with the explicit goal of healing rather than conquest. They carried supplies crafted through unified magic, wore protective enchantments that drew on both traditions, and bore letters of introduction signed by leaders from both sides of the former conflict. Seraphina found herself feeling simultaneously proud and terrified as she watched the group disappear into the morning mist. So much depended on their succinode, just their own safety, but the future of every bonded pair who might emerge in the years to come. They will succeed, Kael said quietly, taking her hand as they stood together on the castle's main balcony. They carry with them everything we have learned, everything we have built. They are ready for this. I know, Seraphina replied. But knowing and feeling are not always the same thing. No, he agreed. They are not. But perhaps that is as it should be. If this were easy, if we did not feel the weight of what we are attempting, it would suggest that we do not truly understand the magnitude of what is at stake. The weeks that followed were among the most difficult Seraphina had experienced since her first arrival at the castle. Reports arrived irregularly, carried by messenger birds and magical communications that provided only fragments of information about the expedition's progress. They learned that the group had been welcomed in some cities and turned away from others, that their healing work was producing remarkable results where they were allowed to practice, and that political tensions were rising in response to their presence. Then came the message that changed everything. "The plague has been contained," Luna announced, bursting into the library where Seraphina and Kael were working on a complex translation of ancient texts. Not just treat it contained. Jin and Saskia's techniques proved effective, but more than that, they were able to train local healers in simplified versions of their methods. The knowledge is spreading independently now. "What about the political response?" Kael asked. "Mixed," Luna admitted. "The conclave is furious, but they are being ignored by the local authorities who have seen the results firsthand. 3 kingdoms have officially requested that bonded pairs be stationed permanently in their major cities. And..." She paused, her expression growing complicated. "And there have been 17 new bondings reported in the regions where our people worked. The process is accelerating." Seraphina felt a mixture of triumph and apprehension. The success of the healing mission was everything they had hoped for, but the acceleration of the bonding process carried implications that she was not certain the world was ready to handle. "How are the new bonded pairs being received?" she asked. "Better than expected in most cases," Luna replied. "It seems that seeing unified magic used for healing has changed public perception significantly. People are more willing to accept bonds when they understand that the result is enhanced ability to help others, rather than increased potential for destruction." "That is encouraging," Kael said. "But we need to be prepared for backlash from those who have invested heavily in maintaining the old divisions. Success often provokes more desperate opposition than failure." He was proven correct sooner than any of them anticipated. The attack came not from human authorities or demon separatists, but from a coalition of extremists from both sides who had decided that the bonded pairs represented an existential threat to the purity of their respective peoples. The assault on the castle began at dawn, with coordinated strikes against the protective wards that had stood for centuries. The attackers used a combination of human siege magic and demon shadow techniques, creating an onslaught that would have been impossible before the emergence of unified magic, an irony that was not lost on any of Cried. "The defenders. They are using our own innovations against us," Seraphina observed grimly as she and Kael worked together to reinforce the failing barriers. The castle's defenses had been designed to repel either human or demon attacks, but not a coordinated assault that drew on both traditions. "Then we respond with something they cannot counter," Kael replied, his voice carrying the calm focus that she had learned to associate with his most decisive moments. "We use the full potential of what we have become." The battle that followed would be remembered as a turning point in the history of both peoples. The bonded pairs who remained in the castle fought not as individuals but as a unified force, their various abilities combining and amplifying each other in ways that their attackers had not anticipated. Healing magic merged with protective barriers to create defenses that grew stronger under assault. Agricultural techniques combined with weather magic to turn the very ground around the castle into an ally. Weapons crafted through unified magic proved capable of neutralizing threats without causing permanent harm to their wielders. But the most significant aspect of the conflict was not the magic employed by either side, was the reaction of the non-bonded observers who witnessed the battle from nearby communities. For the first time, ordinary people could see the clear difference between magic used to destroy and magic used to protect, between power wielded in service of hatred and power wielded in service of love. The attackers fled, Luna reported, as the sun set on a day that had tested everything they had built. But more importantly, delegations are arriving from every major settlement within 100 miles. They want to understand what happened here, want to know how we were able to defend ourselves without causing mass casualties among our attackers. "And what are you telling them?" Seraphina asked, exhausted but curious about how their story was being received. "The truth," Luna replied simply. But unified magic is not about gaining power over others, but about finding power with others. But the bonds between us make us stronger not because they allow us to dominate, but because they allow us to understand. In the months that followed the battle, the world began to change in ways that even the most optimistic of the bonded pairs had not dared to predict. Kingdoms that had maintained rigid separation between human and demon populations began to experiment with integration. Trade agreements were negotiated that took advantage of the complementary strengths of both peoples. And most significantly, the rate of new bondings accelerated to the point where they became a regular occurrence rather than a rare miracle. We are witnessing the birth of a new era. Kael observed one evening as he and Seraphina walked through the castle gardens, now expanded to include growing spaces designed by bonded pairs whose agricultural innovations had transformed the very concept of what was possible in the Shadowlands. Sometimes I wonder if we truly understand what we have set in motion, Seraphina replied. When I first followed my soulmate Mark to this place, I was thinking only of my own fate. I could not have imagined that our choice to trust each other would affect the destinies of so many others. Perhaps that is for the best, Kael suggested. If we had known the full scope of what would follow, we might have been too overwhelmed to take the first step. Or too frightened of the responsibility, Seraphina agreed. Change on this scale, it is both exhilarating and terrifying. But necessary, Kael said firmly. The old way of doing things was not sustainable. The hatred between our peoples was consuming resources and lives that could have been used to build something beautiful instead. What we have accomplished is not perfect, but it is better. Much better, Seraphina confirmed, pausing beside a fountain that sparkled with water enhanced by magic to promote healing in any who drank from it. And it is only the beginning. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in a sky that no longer carried the oppressive weight of perpetual twilight. Around them, the castle hummed with the voices of people from both sides of the former conflict, working together to solve problems that it seemed insurmountable just a few years earlier. Luna appeared at the garden entrance, now wearing the formal robes that marked her as the official liaison between the castle and the various governments that sought to establish relationships with the bonded pairs. At 21, she had grown into a remarkable young woman whose insights into both human and demon nature made her invaluable in the delicate work of diplomacy. I hope I am not interrupting, she said, approaching with the easy confidence of someone who knew she was welcome. Never, Seraphina assured her. What news from the outside world? Remarkable news. Luna replied, her eyes bright with excitement. The University of Astoria has officially established a Department of Unified Magical Studies. They are offering full scholarships to bonded pairs who wish to formalize their research and share their discoveries with the broader academic community. That is a significant development, Kael observed. Astoria has always been considered the most conservative of the human academic institutions. It is, Luna agreed. But they have apparently concluded that they cannot afford to ignore the innovations that unified magic has produced. Their formal statement cited the agricultural enhancements, the medical breakthroughs, and the conflict resolution techniques that have emerged from bonded pairs as evidence that this field of study deserves serious academic attention. What about opposition? Seraphina asked. The conclave cannot be pleased about this development. The conclave is in disarray, Luna reported with evident satisfaction. Half of their membership has resigned in protest over their continued opposition to unified magic, while the other half is demanding a complete revision of their official policies. They are too busy fighting among themselves to mount any effective opposition to external developments. The news from Astoria represented more than just academic recognition. It was a sign that unified magic was transitioning from a revolutionary movement to an established part of the world's magical traditions. The implications were profound, both for the bonded pairs who had pioneered these techniques and for the future generations who would grow up in a world where cooperation between peoples was normal rather than miraculous. There is something else, Luna continued, her expression growing more serious. I have been corresponding with some of the younger bonded pairs, those who have emerged in the past year. They are reporting experiences that differ significantly from what we have documented in the older bonds. Different how? Kael asked, his attention immediately focused on any information that might affect the safety of those following in their footsteps. Their bonding process appears to be easier, Luna explained. Less traumatic, more intuitive. And their unified abilities seem to manifest more quickly and with greater stability than what we experienced. Seraphina felt a thrill of excitement at the implications. The process is evolving. As more bonds are formed, as the techniques are refined and the acceptance grows, the experience becomes more natural. That is my assessment as well, Luna agreed. But it raises questions about what this means for the future. If bonding becomes easier, if the benefits become more apparent, if the social resistance continues to diminish, we could be looking at a fundamental shift in the nature of human and demon society. A shift toward what? Kael inquired. Toward a world where the distinction between human and demon becomes largely irrelevant. Luna replied, where individuals are valued for their abilities and character rather than their species of origin, where magical innovation is driven by collaboration rather than competition. The vision she described was beautiful, but Seraphina could not help but wonder about the challenges such a transformation would bring. Change of this magnitude would inevitably create disruption, uncertainty, resistance from those who had built their identities around the old divisions. We must be careful, she said thoughtfully. Progress is wonderful, but if it moves too quickly, it can create instability that undermines everything we are trying to accomplish. I agree, Kael said. We need to continue supporting new bonded pairs, but we also need to work with non-bonded individuals to help them adapt to the changing world. If we focus exclusively on those who share our experiences, we risk creating a new form of division. That is why the university partnership is so important, Luna pointed out. It provides a framework for sharing knowledge with the broader community, for ensuring that the benefits of unified magic are accessible to everyone rather than just to bonded pairs. Over the following years, the world continued to transform in ways both subtle and dramatic. The castle evolved from a refuge for persecuted bonded pairs into a research center that attracted scholars, innovators from across the known world. The techniques developed there were applied to challenges ranging from environmental restoration to disease prevention to conflict resolution, creating a ripple effect of positive change that spread far beyond the borders of the Shadowlands. Seraphina found herself taking on new roles as the movement grew. She served as a teacher, sharing her knowledge of traditional healing arts and helping others understand how to integrate them with demon transformation magic. She worked as a diplomat, traveling to distant kingdoms to negotiate agreements that would benefit both human and demon populations, and increasingly, she functioned as a historian, documenting the rapid changes taking place and ensuring that the lessons learned would be preserved for future generations. Sometimes I feel like we are living through history rather than simply experiencing our lives, she confided to Kael one evening as they reviewed reports from the various academies that had been established to train bonded pairs. Is that troubling to you? He asked, looking up from a particularly complex diplomatic proposal that required careful consideration. Not troubling, exactly, Seraphina replied, but overwhelming. When I was growing up in Millbrook, my greatest ambition was to become skilled enough in the healing arts to help my neighbors deal with common ailments. I never imagined that I would be involved in reshaping the fundamental nature of magical practice. None of us did, Kael agreed. But perhaps that is why we were able to succeed. If we had understood the full scope of what we were attempting, we might have been too intimidated to begin. Do you think we made the right choices? Seraphina asked. Do you think the world is better for the changes we have set in motion? Kael set aside his work and took her hands in his, the simple contact sending a warm pulse of shared energy between them. Even after all these years, the bond between them remained as strong as ever, a constant source of strength and comfort. Look around us, he said gently. Look at Luna, who has grown from a traumatized child into a confident young woman who serves as a bridge between peoples. Look at the students who come here seeking knowledge rather than power, the scholars who collaborate rather than compete, the communities that have learned to solve problems through cooperation rather than conflict. I look at them every day, Seraphina replied, and I am amazed by what they have accomplished. Then you have your answer, Kael said. The world is not perfect, it may never be perfect, but it is better. It is more just, more compassionate, more hopeful than it was when we first met in this castle. And that improvement is the result of countless individuals choosing to build rather than destroy, to trust rather than fear, to love rather than hate. As if summoned by their conversation, Luna appeared in the doorway, now carrying the newest addition to their famille baby whose parentage represented the ultimate symbol of the new world they, Akra, had helped create. The child was the daughter of two bonded pairs who had fallen in love and decided to start a family together, creating bloodlines that would carry both human and demon heritage in ways that previous generations would have considered impossible. She is beautiful, Seraphina said, taking the infant into her arms and marveling at the perfect blend of features that marked her mixed heritage. She is the future, Luna replied softly. She and the dozens of other children like her who have been born to bonded families in the past year. They will grow up in a world where cooperation is normal, where diversity is celebrated, where love truly can conquer any barrier. What will we call her generation? Kael wondered aloud. What name will history give to those who are born into unity rather than division? The inheritors, Seraphina suggested, because they inherit not the conflicts of the past, but the peace that was built Kapare. From those conflicts. The inheritors, Luna repeated, testing the sound of the words. I like that. It suggests that they are not just passive recipients of what we have created, but active participants in continuing to build something better. The infant stirred in Seraphina's arms, opening eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom impossible in someone so young. For a moment, Seraphina could swear that the child was looking directly at her, recognizing her as one of the people responsible for the world into which she had been born. She will never know the fear that we lived with, Kael observed. She will never have to question whether love is possible across the boundaries that once divided our peoples. No, Seraphina agreed, but she will face challenges that we cannot anticipate, will need to solve problems that we cannot imagine. The world we have given her is better than the one we inherited, but it is not finished. Each generation must continue the work of building something worthy of the love that created it. As the years passed and the transformation of the world continued, Seraphina often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The young woman who had followed her soulmate Mark into unknown territory seemed like a different person. Someone whose courage and determination she admired but could barely recognize as herself. The mark itself had long since faded, its purpose fulfilled in ways that exceeded anything the ancient prophecies had predicted. But the bond it had created remained as strong as ever, a connection that had grown from desperate attraction into deep love, from magical necessity into chosen partnership, from personal salvation into a force that had reshaped the world. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had chosen differently? Luna asked during one of their evening conversations, now a tradition that had persisted through decades of change. She was preparing to leave the castle herself, accepting a position as the first director of unified studies at a new university being established in the heart of the former borderlands. If I had chosen differently, there would be no us to wonder about it, Seraphina replied with a smile. But I understand what you are asking. Do I ever regret the path we took, the responsibilities we accepted, the changes we set in motion? Do you? Never, Seraphina said without hesitation. Even in the most difficult moments, even when the weight of what we were attempting seemed overwhelming, I have never wished that I had made a different choice. The bond between Kael and me was not just about our personal happiness, it was about the possibility of a better world for everyone. And that world has been achieved, Luna observed, has it? Kael interjected, joining the conversation as he often did. Or have we simply created the foundation for others to continue building? Both, Seraphina replied. We have achieved something remarkable, a world where cooperation is possible, where love can bridge any gap, where the next generation can inherit hope instead of hatred. But you are right that this is a foundation rather than a finished structure. Each new challenge, each new discovery, each new bonded pair adds another layer to what we are building. Speaking of new discoveries, Luna said, producing yet another of her journals, this one bound in leather that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. I have been researching some of the older archives, trying to understand the historical context for what we have accomplished. What I found is disturbing. Disturbing how? Kael asked, immediately alert to any information that might affect the safety of the community they had built. The separation between humans and demons was not the first time magical traditions have been artificially divided. Luna explained, opening the journal to reveal pages covered with notes in multiple languages. According to these texts, there have been at least 3 previous cycles of unification and separation spanning millennia. Each time, the unified magic grew powerful enough to threaten established power structures, and each time, those in authority found ways to shatter the bonds and reimpose division. Seraphina felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. Are you suggesting that what we have accomplished is temporary? But the forces that oppose unified magic will eventually find a way to destroy what we have built? I am suggesting that we need to be prepared for that possibility, Luna replied soberly. The cycles described in these texts follow a predictable pattern: initial resistance, gradual acceptance, widespread adoption, political backlash, and finally systematic destruction of the unified magical knowledge. What caused the destruction in previous cycles? Kael inquired, his voice carrying the tone he used when analyzing potential military threats. Fear, Luna said simply. Fear among non-magical populations that the bonded pairs were becoming too powerful. Fear among traditional magical practitioners that they were being rendered obsolete. Fear among political leaders that unified magic could challenge their authority. In each case, these fears were exploited by those who had the most to gain from a return to division. Then we must ensure that such fears do not take root in our time, Seraphina declared. We must make certain that unified magic is seen as a tool for serving others rather than for gaining power over them. We had been trying to do that, Luna pointed out. But according to these historical accounts, similar efforts were made in previous cycles. The problem is that fear is often stronger than evidence, especially when it is deliberately cultivated by those who benefit from conflict. The implications of Luna's research weighed heavily on all of them in the days that followed. The idea that their achievements might be temporary, but the world they had worked so hard to build could be destroyed by the same forces that had shattered previous attempts at unity, was almost too painful to contemplate. But it also provided them with valuable information about potential threats and possible strategies for protection. If the patterns Luna had identified held true, they could anticipate where opposition might emerge and take steps to address it before it became dangerous. We need to accelerate the documentation process, Seraphina decided during one of their strategy sessions. If there is a chance that unified magical knowledge could be systematically destroyed, we must ensure that enough information survives to allow for future reconstruction. I have been thinking about that, Kael said. What if we distributed the knowledge as widely as possible? Instead of concentrating our research in a few major institutions, we could establish small archives in hundreds of communities, making it impossible for any coordinated effort to eliminate all traces of what we have learned. That is an excellent idea, Luna agreed. But we would need to be careful about how we implement it. If we appear to be preparing for the destruction of our movement, we might inadvertently encourage those who would like to see that destruction occur. Then we frame it as educational outreach, Seraphina suggested. We present the distributed archives as a way of making unified magical knowledge more accessible to ordinary people, rather than as a defensive measure against potential persecution. The implementation of this strategy required careful coordination and significant resources, but the network of bonded pairs that had emerged over the years proved remarkably effective at organizing such efforts. Within months, simplified guides to unified magical principles were being copied and distributed to libraries, temples, and schools across the known world. The information was presented in accessible terms, focusing on practical applications rather than complex theoretical concepts. Farmers learned techniques for enhancing crop yields through the combination of human earth magic and demon transformation abilities. Healers discovered methods for treating conditions that had previously been considered incurable. Artisans found ways to create objects that served multiple functions through the integration of different magical traditions. The beauty of this approach, observed Marcus during one of the regular gatherings of bonded pairs, is that we are not just preserving knowledge, we are making it useful to people who might never have access to formal magical training. And that utility becomes our best defense against those who would destroy what we have built, added Lirelei. It is much harder to convince people to give up something that improves their daily lives than it is to make them fear something they do not understand. The success of the distribution effort exceeded even their most optimistic projections. Communities that had initially been skeptical of unified magic began requesting additional resources when they saw the practical benefits. Regional governors who had opposed bonded pairs started offering incentives for them to establish permanent residences within their territories. Even some of the religious institutions that had condemned the bonding process began quietly incorporating unified magical techniques into their healing ministries. But success also brought new challenges. As unified magic became more widely accepted, it began to attract the attention of those who saw it as a path to personal power rather than as a tool for serving others. Individuals with no genuine bond began claiming to possess unified abilities, sometimes causing harm through their incompetent attempts to replicate techniques they did not truly understand. "We are facing a crisis of authenticity," Luna reported during one of their weekly briefings. "The demand for unified magical services has grown so rapidly that unscrupulous individuals are exploiting it for personal gain. Some are claiming to be bonded when they are not. Others are offering training in unified techniques without any real knowledge of the underlying principles. What kind of harm are they causing?" Seraphina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Varied but significant," Luna replied grimly. "Failed healing attempts that have worsened conditions rather than improving them. Agricultural techniques that have damaged rather than enhanced soil fertility. Weapons that appear to be enhanced but actually contain dangerous flaws. In at least 3 cases, people have died as a result of fraudulent unified magical services." End quote. "This could destroy everything we have worked to build," Kael observed. "If people begin to associate unified magic with incompetence or fraud, the backlash could be severe enough to undo decades of progress." "Then we establish standards," Seraphina said firmly. "We create a system for verifying authentic unified magical abilities and training. Something that allows people to distinguish between genuine practitioners and fraudulent imitators." "How do we do that without appearing to be trying to control or monopolize unified magic?" Luna asked. "One of the reasons our movement has been successful is that it has been based on voluntary cooperation rather than hierarchical authority. We make the verification process transparent and accessible," Kael Bonray suggested. "We polish the criteria for authentic bonding, provide detailed descriptions of genuine unified magical effects, and train local authorities to recognize the differences between real and fake practitioners. And we make it clear that verification is about protecting people from harm, not about restricting access to knowledge," Seraphina added. "Anyone who wants to learn unified magical techniques is welcome to do so. But those who claim to offer professional services should be required to demonstrate actual competence." The development of verification standards proved to be one of the most complex challenges they had yet faced. Unlike traditional magical abilities, which could be tested through standardized procedures, unified magic required assessment of both technical skill and the authentic emotional bond that made such skills possible. After months of research and experimentation, they developed a process that combined practical demonstrations with magical resonance testing. Genuine bonded pairs produced a distinctive harmonic signature when working together, something that could be detected by trained observers but could not be faked by fraudulent practitioners. "The testing process is working well," Luna reported 6 months after the verification system had been implemented. "We have identified and stopped dozens of fraudulent practitioners, while confirming the authenticity of hundreds of genuine bonded pairs. Public confidence in unified magical services is recovering." "What about resistance to the testing process itself?" Kael inquired. "I would have expected some opposition to the idea of standardized verification. There has been some, Luna admitted. Mostly from individuals whose claims of bonding could not be substantiated. But the genuine bonded pairs have been universally supportive, recognizing that verification protects their reputations as well as their client's safety. And the broader political response? Surprisingly positive, Luna said with evident satisfaction. Several kingdoms have officially adopted our verification standards as part of their licensing requirements for magical practitioners. The University of Astoria has incorporated our testing methods into Prapbred. Their certification programs, even some of the religious institutions that were initially skeptical had begun requiring verification for anyone claiming to use unified magic in their healing ministries. The success of the verification system marked another significant milestone in the evolution of unified magic from revolutionary movement to established institution. But it also highlighted the ongoing tension between preserving the voluntary, cooperative spirit that had made their success possible and establishing the structures necessary to protect that success from those who would exploit or destroy it. "We are walking a fine line," Seraphina observed during one of their evening discussions. "Every step we take toward institutionalization makes us stronger and more stable, but it also moves us further away from the spontaneous, organic growth that characterized our early years. Is that necessarily a bad thing?" Luna asked. "Institutionalization might reduce some of the flexibility and creativity that drove our initial innovations, but it also provides protection against the forces that destroyed previous cycles of Dublin. Unified magic. Both perspectives have merit," Kael said thoughtfully. "The key is to maintain the balance to build enough structure to ensure stability and continuity, but not so much that we stifle the innovation and adaptability that made unified magic valuable in the first place. Perhaps that is why the bonding process continues to evolve," Seraphina suggested. "Each new generation of bonded pairs brings fresh perspectives and new approaches, ensuring that the movement does not become rigid or stagnant." "That is an encouraging thought," Luna agreed. "Speaking of new generations, I have some remarkable news about the children who were born to bonded families. The researchers at Astoria have been conducting longitudinal studies of their development, and the results are extraordinary." "Extraordinary how?" Kael asked, leaning forward with interest. "They appear to have intuitive access to unified magical principles from a very early age," Luna explained. "Children as young as 5 are demonstrating abilities that would normally require years of training to develop. They seem to understand instinctively how to combine human and demon magical traditions without needing explicit instruction." "Are their abilities stable?" Seraphina inquired. "Or are we looking at another situation where training and verification become necessary?" "Remarkably stable," Luna replied. "In fact, the children seem to have fewer problems with magical control than either human or demon children of the same age. It is as though the unified magical traditions are more natural to them than the separated traditions that their parents grew up with." The implications were staggering. If children born to bonded families possessed intuitive unified magical abilities, then the artificial separation between human and demon magic might disappear entirely within a generation or two. The world that Seraphina and Kael had worked so hard to create might become not just possible but inevitable. What does this mean for our efforts to preserve and protect unified magical knowledge? Kael wondered. If the next generation possesses these abilities naturally, will our concerns about historical cycles of destruction become irrelevant? Or will it make those concerns more urgent? Seraphina countered. If unified magic becomes the natural state for an entire generation, the backlash from those who oppose it might be more severe than anything we have yet encountered. That is a sobering thought, Luna admitted. But I prefer to focus on the opportunities rather than the threats. If we can successfully transition to a world where unified magic is the norm rather than the exception, we will have achieved something unprecedented in recorded history. We will have broken the cycle, Kael said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. Instead of allowing the forces of division to reassert themselves, we will have made unity so natural and widespread that it becomes irreversible. That is the goal, Seraphina agreed. But achieving it will require wisdom, patience, and probably more courage than any of us have yet been called upon to demonstrate. As the years continue to pass, the children born to bonded families grew into remarkable young adults, whose very existence challenged every assumption about the limitations of magical practice. They moved seamlessly between human and demon traditions, created innovations that neither pure bloodline could have achieved, and approached the world with a natural assumption that cooperation was possible in any situation. Luma's daughter, adopted rather than biological, but raised in the unified magical tradition, became one of the most prominent examples of this new generation. At 16, she could perform healing techniques that surpassed anything Seraphina had achieved at twice that age, could create artistic works that incorporated both human craftsmanship and demon transformation magic, and could mediate disputes between traditional practitioners with an insight that seemed impossibly mature. "She makes me feel ancient," Seraphina confided to Kael one evening as they watched the young woman lead a group of mixed heritage children in a collaborative magic exercise that would have been considered impossible just 20 years earlier. "She makes me feel hopeful," Kael replied. "When I see what she and others like her can accomplish naturally, I know that our work has been worthwhile. We may not have changed our own world completely, but we have given our children a world where anything is possible." "Do you think they understand what we sacrificed to give them that world?" Seraphina asked. "I think they understand that sacrifice was made," Kael said thoughtfully. "But I hope they never fully comprehend how difficult it was, or how close we came to failure. If they can take their freedoms for granted, if cooperation feels natural rather than revolutionary, then we have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger bearing news that would test everything they had built. The message came from the Far Eastern kingdoms, territories that had remained largely isolated from the changes sweeping the rest of the world. "A coalition has formed," the messenger reported, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "They call themselves the Purest Alliance, and they have declared their intention to cleanse the world of the abomination of mixed magic. They have armies. They have magical weapons designed specifically to disrupt bonded pairs, and they are marching westward." "How large are these armies?" Kael asked, immediately shifting into the strategic mindset that had served him well during the old conflicts. 50,000 soldiers, perhaps more," the messenger replied. "But that is not the most concerning aspect of their force. They have somehow developed techniques that can sever soulmate bonds, separating bonded pairs and stripping them of their unified abilities." Seraphina felt her blood run cold. The idea of having her bond with Kael forcibly severed was more terrifying than any physical threat she could imagine. After decades of shared consciousness, of knowing that she was never truly alone, the prospect of returning to the isolation of individual existence seemed like a kind of death. "How is such a thing possible?" she asked, though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer. "We believe they had access to some of the same historical archives that Luna discovered," the messenger explained. "The techniques for forced separation were apparently developed during previous cycles, as a weapon against unified magic practitioners. Then we must prepare to defend not just our physical territory, but the very nature of what we have become," Kael declared. "This is not just another military conflict, it is a battle for the future of magical practice itself." The preparations for what would become known as the War of Unification consumed the following months. Unlike previous conflicts between humans and demons, this was not a battle between two separated peoples, but a defense of unity against those who would reimpose division. Bonded pairs from across the world converged on the Shadowlands, bringing with them skills and knowledge that had been developed in isolation but could now be combined into something greater than the sum of its parts. The castle that had once been Kael's lonely fortress became the command center for an alliance that spanned every known territory. "We have advantages they cannot counter," Luna observed during one of the strategy sessions, her analytical mind working to identify every possible tactical benefit. "Their weapons may be designed to disrupt bonded pairs, but they were created based on historical records of how bonding worked in previous cycles. Our bonds have evolved, become more sophisticated and stable than anything described in the old texts. What kind of evolution? Asked Marcus, now serving as the chief coordinator for defensive preparations. Multiple layers of connection, Luna explained. The original soulmate bonds were based primarily on emotional resonance. Ours incorporate emotional, magical, intellectual, and spiritual connections that reinforce each other. Severing one layer does sash, not automatically destroy the others. That is encouraging, Seraphina said. But we cannot assume that our defenses are impregnable. We must prepare for the possibility that some bonds will be damaged or destroyed, and ensure that we can continue to function even if our unified abilities are compromised. We also have advantages in terms of motivation, Kael pointed out. They are fighting to destroy something they fear and do not understand. We are fighting to protect something we love and have spent our lives building. That difference in purpose will manifest in every aspect of the conflict. The war, when it finally came, was unlike anything recorded in the histories of either people. The purest alliance fought with desperate ferocity, using weapons and techniques specifically designed to cause maximum damage to unified magical practitioners. But they found themselves facing opponents who had transcended the limitations that had defined previous conflicts. Bonded pairs fought not as individuals but as perfect partnerships, their abilities flowing together in seamless harmony. When one was injured, their partner could channel healing energy directly through their bond. When magical attacks threatened to overwhelm individual defenses, multiple pairs could link together to create protection that scaled exponentially rather than simply additively. Most importantly, the defenders fought with a clarity of purpose that their attackers could not match. Every bonded pair had something specific to protect, not just abstract principles, but actual people and communities whose lives had been improved by unified magic. They cannot understand what they are trying to destroy, Seraphina observed during a brief respite between battles. To them, we are an abomination to be eliminated. They cannot see that we are simply people who have chosen to love rather than hate, to build rather than destroy. Their inability to understand us is both a weakness and a strength, Kael replied, tending to wounds that would have been fatal without the enhanced healing abilities their bond provided. It makes them predictable, but it also makes them relentless. They will not be deterred by evidence that their cause is unjust. Then we must defeat them decisively enough that the question of justice becomes irrelevant, Luna declared, arriving with reports from the various battlefronts. We must demonstrate that unified magic is not just morally superior to division but practically superior as well. The turning point came when the children of bonded families, those remarkable young people who had grown up with unified magic as their natural state, chose to enter the conflict despite the protests of their parents. You cannot ask us to stand aside while everything we have ever known is threatened, Luna's adopted daughter declared during a heated family conference. This is our world too, our future that is being attacked. We have abilities that could make the difference between victory and defeat. You are children, Seraphina protested. This is not your responsibility. We are not children, the young woman replied with quiet dignity. We are the first generation to grow up free from the artificial divisions that have plagued our peoples for millennia. We are the living proof that your sacrifices were worthwhile. If we do not fight for that freedom, who will? The involvement of the unified generation, as they came to be known, transformed the nature of the conflict entirely. Their abilities surpassed anything that either side had anticipated, combining power with precision in ways that made traditional military tactics obsolete. But more importantly, their very presence on the battlefield served as a powerful symbol of what was at stake. These young people represented the future that unified magic had made possible, a future where cooperation was natural, where diversity was celebrated, where love truly could overcome any barrier. Look at them, Kael said, watching a group of teenagers work together to neutralize a magical weapon that had been designed to kill bonded pairs. Look at what they can accomplish when they are not limited by the fears and prejudices that constrained previous generations. They are beautiful, Seraphina agreed, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the impossible grace with which these young people wielded power that she and Kael had struggled for years to master. They are everything we dreamed they could become. The war ended not with a decisive battle, but with a gradual recognition by the purest alliance that they were fighting against the inevitable. As more of their soldiers witnessed the abilities of the unified generation, as they saw the genuine care and compassion that motivated the defenders, as they began to understand that unified magic enhanced rather than corrupted human nature, resistance began to crumble from within. "We surrender," the leader of the alliance finally declared, though his words carried more exhaustion than defeat. "We cannot fight against something that so clearly represents the best of what our peoples could become." The aftermath of the war required even more careful management than the conflict itself. The integration of former enemies into the unified magical community was a delicate process that required patience, wisdom, and a willingness to forgive those who had genuinely believed they were protecting their people from corruption. "Some of them will never fully accept what we represent," Luna observed during one of the reconciliation sessions. "But others are already beginning to see the benefits of cooperation. We must focus on nurturing the seeds of understanding, rather than trying to force acceptance where it cannot take root. The important thing is that the threat of systematic destruction has been eliminated," Kael noted. "The historical cycle has been broken. Unified magic is now too widespread, too deeply integrated into the fabric of society, too protected by institutional structures to be eliminated by any coordinated effort, and too natural to the rising generation to be forgotten," Seraphina added. "Even if another purist movement emerges in the future, they will be fighting against young people for whom cooperation is as instinctive as breathing." As peace settled over the world once more, Seraphina found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The young woman who had followed her soulmate Mark into the unknown would barely recognize the world that now existed. A world where children grew up expecting cooperation between peoples, where magical innovation was driven by collaboration rather than competition, where love was seen as a source of strength rather than vulnerability. "Do you think we have finally achieved what the ancient prophecies promised?" she asked Kael during one of their evening walks through gardens that now hosted plants from every corner of the known world, each species thriving in soil enriched by unified magical techniques. "I think we have achieved something even better," Kael replied, taking her hand in the gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the decades of their partnership. "The prophecies spoke of healing the wounds between our peoples, but what we have actually accomplished is the creation of a new people, one that transcends the artificial boundaries that once seemed insurmountable." "The children of unity," Seraphina said, watching a group of young people whose heritage included bloodlines from multiple peoples work together on a project that would have been impossible for any single magical tradition to achieve. "They are not human or demon, but something new, something that contains the best of both while being limited by the worst of neither." "They are the future," Kael agreed. "And knowing that they will inherit a world where anything is possible, where love is stronger than fear, where cooperation is more natural than conflict, that knowledge makes every struggle we have endured worthwhile." The years that followed were marked not by dramatic conflicts or revolutionary changes, but by the steady, satisfying work of building and maintaining a world worth living in. Seraphina continued her research into the healing arts, developing techniques that drew on unified magical principles to address ailments that had once been considered incurable. Kael worked with regional leaders to establish trade agreements and diplomatic protocols that took advantage of the complementary strengths of different peoples. Luna, now recognized as one of the foremost experts on unified magical theory, established a network of research institutions that ensured the continued evolution and refinement of collaborative techniques. Her adopted daughter and others of the unified generation began taking on leadership roles, bringing fresh perspectives and innovative approaches to challenges that their elders had not even recognized. "Sometimes I wonder what Lydia would think of the world we have created," Seraphina mused one evening as she and Kael sat together in the library where they had first begun to understand each other. The room had been expanded several times over the years, its shelves now holding texts in dozens of languages and covering every aspect of unified magical practice. "I think she would be proud," Kael replied. "You have become everything she hoped you could be, and more than she probably dared to imagine." "We have all become more than we dared to imagine," Seraphina corrected. "When I first arrived here, terrified and uncertain, Did you ever think we would see children playing in these halls who consider it perfectly normal to combine human and demon magical traditions? Never, Kael admitted. I thought, if we were very fortunate, that we might find a way to coexist peacefully. I never imagined that we would create something entirely new, something that transcended the limitations of both our backgrounds. And yet here we are, Seraphina said, listening to the distant sound of laughter echoing through corridors that had once been filled with loneliness and shadow. Here we are, surrounded by the living proof that love really can change the world. Here we are. Kael agreed, pulling her closer in an embrace that still carried the same warmth and comfort it had provided on that first night, when they had chosen to trust each other despite every reason to be afraid. The soulmate mark that had brought them together had long since become unnecessary, its purpose fulfilled in ways that exceeded anything the ancient magic had been designed to accomplish. But the bond it had created remained as strong as ever, a connection that had grown from desperate attraction into deep love, from magical necessity into chosen partnership, from personal salvation into a force that had literally reshaped the world. As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace that had witnessed so many important conversations over the years, Seraphina felt a profound sense of completion. Not the ending of a story, but the recognition that they had built something that would continue to grow and evolve long after they were gone. The Demon Prince's arms had indeed been her destination, even when she had not known it. But more than that, they had been the beginning of a journey that had led to possibilities she could never have imagined. In choosing to trust, to love, to build rather than destroy, she and Kael had not just found their own happiness, they had created a template for how the world could be. And in the end, that was perhaps the greatest magic of all, the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very fabric of reality itself, through the simple but revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, cooperation over conflict, unity over division. The future stretched out before them, bright with possibility and rich with the promise that their children and grandchildren would inherit a world where anything was possible. And at the heart of that future was the bond between two people who had dared to believe that love was stronger than any force that might try to keep them apart. Together, they had changed the world. Together, they would continue to build something beautiful for as long as they drew breath. And together, they had proven that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with the end of one story, but with the recognition that every ending is simply the beginning of something even more wonderful.